Story number 1. I'm still surprised we didn't get expelled for what we pulled off during senior year. It was supposed to be just a simple prank, something to make our class stand out, leave a legacy, you know? What we didn't expect was for things to escalate the way they did. And honestly, we didn't mean for anyone to end up at the hospital. I swear. It all started with Dan. He was the kind of guy who was always full of half-baked ideas, but convinced they were genius. You know the type. Always scheming, always looking for some way to stir things up without actually thinking about the consequences. Well, this time, his brilliant idea was to borrow a couple of the chickens from the agriculture department's barn and release them in the school. Think about it, he said. Chickens running around the hallways during finals week? It'll be epic. The teachers will lose their minds. In hindsight, this should have been the first red flag, but at the time, we were all in. It sounded harmless enough, right? Just a few chickens, some harmless chaos. What could go wrong? We snuck into the barn the night before with a duffel bag. Yes, a duffel bag. As if we were going to stuff live chickens into it like they were footballs. This was when we realized that none of us actually knew how to handle chickens. Dan, the genius mastermind, couldn't even pick one up. Every time he got close, it would squawk and flap its wings like it was possessed. Eventually, we managed to corral 2 of them into a large dog crate we found in the janitor's closet. The next morning, we strolled into school like it was any other day, except we had a crate full of chickens in the back of Dan's beat-up Honda. We waited until first period was almost over before making our move. Dan and I ducked out of class, carrying the crate between us like we were delivering a pizza. As soon as we reached the main hallway, we pulled open the crate door and let them loose. That's when everything went wrong. First, I didn't know chickens could run that fast. These things bolted down the hallway like someone had set their tail feathers on fire. Kids started screaming, diving out of the way, and at least 3 people slipped trying to chase them. One chicken darted into the girls' bathroom, while the other took off toward the cafeteria. Chaos. Absolute chaos. We thought that was the worst of it, but then things took a dark turn. Apparently, these weren't just your average chickens. They were part of some science experiment, and one of them was on some kind of medication. Of course, we had no clue. All we knew was that suddenly, kids were shouting, and teachers were sprinting down the halls trying to catch these feathered tornadoes. The one that ran into the girls' bathroom? Well, it slipped on the wet floor, slid into a stall, and hit its head on the toilet. You can't make this stuff up. They had to call the school nurse, and next thing we knew, an ambulance was pulling up outside to take a chicken, to the vet. I can still hear Dan whispering, "Do you think we'll be charged with animal cruelty?" Like this was some kind of criminal mastermind operation gone wrong. And if that wasn't bad enough, the second chicken, remember, the one that ran toward the cafeteria, somehow ended up in the kitchen, where it knocked over a giant pot of soup, spilling boiling liquid all over the place. One of the lunch ladies slipped in the mess, and before we knew it, she was being wheeled out on a stretcher with a broken arm. That's when we realized we might have taken this a little too far. By the time the principal caught wind of what was happening, the entire school was in a state of total pandemonium. Classes were canceled, and they locked down the building like it was an active shooter situation, except instead of hunting for a dangerous criminal, they were hunting for a chicken. The aftermath was intense. They called an emergency assembly, where the principal stood on stage, red-faced and fuming, while the rest of us sat there, trying to act innocent. No one could prove it was us, yet, but everyone had their suspicions, especially when Dan started asking if chickens could survive concussions during third period. The school brought in extra security for the rest of finals week, just in case anyone else got any bright ideas. And the chickens? Well, one recovered fully, but the other had to be retired from the experiment. No one ever explained what that meant, but it didn't sound good. The lunch lady with the broken arm, she got a settlement, and rumor has it, she now tells everyone she was taken out by a chicken riot. As for us, we managed to get away with it, barely. There was a lot of whispering, a few side glances from teachers, but no one ever confronted us directly. Maybe they were too embarrassed to admit they'd been bested by a couple of high school kids and some rogue poultry. Either way, we never pulled a prank like that again. But every time I walk by a rotisserie chicken at the grocery store, I can't help but laugh a little and think, we could have been legends. Story number 2. It's been almost a decade, and I still remember that day like it was yesterday. It was supposed to be an ordinary Tuesday lunch period, nothing special, just another boring high school day. But then the fight broke out, and all hell broke loose. I'm talking about the kind of chaos you only see in movies, where everyone just stops what they're doing to watch the madness unfold. The craziest part? It wasn't just any fight. It was the football team versus the basketball team. Yeah, the entire teams. Let me back up a bit. See, our school was known for two things: our undefeated football team and our star-studded basketball team. We were one of those high schools that lived and breathed sports, so the athletes were basically celebrities. But for some reason, there was always this unspoken rivalry between the football and basketball players. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was about who got more attention from the cheerleaders. Or maybe it was just because both teams wanted to be top dog. Whatever it was, things were tense, especially during lunch when everyone hung out in the same cafeteria. I should have known something was about to go down when I walked in and saw the football guys giving the basketball dudes some serious side-eye. At first, I thought it was just typical trash talk. You know, nothing serious. But then, out of nowhere, Troy, one of the football linebackers, stood up and chucked an entire tray of food across the room. It sailed through the air in slow motion, landing right on the captain of the basketball team, Derek. And Derek? He didn't even flinch, just wiped mashed potatoes off his jersey like it was no big deal. But his teammates? Yeah, they weren't having it. Within seconds, Derek's whole crew was up, and suddenly, the football guys started rising from their tables like an army ready to go to war. I'm telling you, the tension in the room skyrocketed, and it felt like time was slowing down as the two teams stared each other down, waiting for someone to throw the first punch. And then it happened. I didn't see who swung first, but once that punch landed, it was on. The cafeteria exploded into chaos, fists flying, trays crashing to the floor, food splattering everywhere. People were screaming, some climbing onto the tables just to get a better view of the carnage. It was like an old-school brawl, only with more milk cartons and pizza slices getting launched into the air. I swear, the entire cafeteria turned into one massive fight club, and all of us regular students were just caught in the crossfire. I tried ducking out of the way, but there were so many people crowding the exits that I couldn't even move. Meanwhile, Derek and Troy were in the middle of it, going toe-to-toe like it was a heavyweight boxing match, while their teammates tackled each other left and right. I figured it was only a matter of time before the teachers showed up to shut it down. But, nope. The teachers were either too shocked or too smart to step into that war zone. I remember seeing Mr. Peterson, our gym teacher, just standing by the door, shaking his head like, "I'm not paid enough for this." Just when it seemed like the cafeteria was going to be torn apart, something completely unexpected happened. Out of nowhere, the lacrosse team burst into the room. They were supposed to be having practice, but apparently, someone had told them about the fight, and they decided they wanted in on the action. Or at least, that's what I thought at first. But instead of jumping into the brawl, they broke it up. I don't know how, but these guys just ran straight into the middle of the chaos, separating the football and basketball players like they were breaking up a street fight. It was nuts. One of the lacrosse guys literally picked up a football player and moved him out of the way like he was a rag doll. Another dude grabbed Derek and Troy by the backs of their jerseys and yanked them apart. Within minutes, the fight was over. Just like that, the football team and basketball team were on opposite sides of the cafeteria, breathing heavily and glaring at each other like they still wanted to throw hands, but they didn't. The lacrosse guys just stood there in the middle, like the neutral zone between two warring countries. And then, because high school is high school, someone started clapping, then another person, and another. And before long, the entire cafeteria was cheering and clapping for the lacrosse team like they were some kind of heroes. It was ridiculous, but at the same time, it was kind of amazing. I mean, when else do you see an entire cafeteria full of teenagers giving a standing ovation for a bunch of lacrosse players who just saved the day? The aftermath, though, that was a different story. The next day, the principal called a school-wide assembly to address the incident. I'm sure they were planning to dish out serious punishments, but instead they gave us this long, boring lecture about sportsmanship and how we should be working together as a school, not fighting against each other, blah blah blah. Half of us weren't even paying attention because we were too busy reliving the cafeteria brawl in our heads. Surprisingly, no one got expelled, but a few players from both teams got suspended for a week. And the lacrosse team, they got a bunch of extra credit from the teachers for their leadership and quick thinking. Like seriously? I mean, they did break up the fight, but it was still kind of weird seeing them get treated like school heroes. Now every time I go back to visit, someone inevitably brings it up. Hey, remember when the football and basketball teams almost killed each other and the lacrosse team had to save the day? It's become one of those legendary high school stories that just gets crazier every time it's told. But yeah, that day, that's one I'll never forget. Story number 3. High school was a strange time, but nothing compares to what happened during our school's annual Teachers' Day event. The day started off like any other Teachers' Day, a bit of a celebration, some students goofing off more than usual, and the teachers pretending they were okay with us skipping real work. It was basically a day where the whole school let loose, and most of us just enjoyed the chaos. But this particular Teachers' Day, let's just say it's infamous for what went down, and I'll never forget it. The event was in full swing when we heard shouting from outside. At first it didn't seem like anything major, just some students messing around near the gates. But then the shouting got louder, angrier. Soon, the entire student body was craning their necks, looking out of the windows to see what was happening. What we saw was a full-on brawl between two groups of students just outside the school grounds. It wasn't your typical school fight either. This was bad. Fists flying, kids getting thrown into fences, backpacks being used as weapons. The teachers noticed the commotion and started running toward the gates, trying to break it up. Our school had a security guard, but he was an older guy who never seemed like he was up for stopping a brawl like this. Still, he was the first one out there, blowing his whistle, trying to push the crowd back. But things were getting out of hand fast, and that's when Mr. R, one of our history teachers, ran out to try and help. Now, Mr. R was the type of teacher who genuinely cared about his students. He was one of those teachers who actually knew what was going on in our lives and always tried to keep things calm. So seeing him rush into the middle of this chaos wasn't all that surprising. But what happened next? Well, that was something no one could have predicted. Mr. R managed to push through the crowd, getting between the two fighting groups, trying to calm them down. But the fight wasn't stopping. I could see the panic on his face as he realized things were spiraling out of control. That's when, in a moment of desperation, he made a decision that would change everything. He turned to the school's security guard and grabbed his gun. At first, I thought he was just going to wave it around, fire a warning shot or something to get everyone to back off. But Mr. R wasn't exactly trained for this kind of thing. And in the heat of the moment, as he fumbled with the gun, his finger slipped on the trigger. The shot rang out, louder than anything I've ever heard in my life. Time seemed to freeze. For a split second, no one moved. No one even breathed. We all just stared in shock as the sound echoed off the school walls. And then came the scream. I'll never forget that scream. One of the students had been hit. It wasn't a fatal shot, not yet, but you could see the blood pouring from his leg where the bullet had grazed him. He dropped to the ground, clutching his thigh, while everyone around him started panicking. Some kids ran, others froze in place, unsure of what to do. The teachers, who had been watching from the sidelines, now rushed forward, some screaming for help, others trying to take control of the situation. But Mr. R, he just stood there, staring at the gun in his hand like he couldn't believe what had just happened. I don't think any of us could. The next few minutes were a blur. The school's administration was on the scene almost immediately, pulling Mr. R away, trying to get the injured student to the nurse's office while someone called 911. The cops showed up not long after, and suddenly our calm little Teachers' Day turned into a crime scene. Yellow tape went up, and we were all herded inside, told to stay put while they sorted everything out. I remember sitting in the classroom with my friends, all of us in stunned silence, whispering to each other about what had just happened. We kept glancing out the window, watching as paramedics arrived, as Mr. R was put into a squad car, as the injured student was wheeled out on a stretcher. The whole school was in shock. The kid who got shot, he survived, thank God, but he ended up dropping out of school not long after. Some said he transferred. Others whispered that his parents pulled him out because they were planning to sue the school. I never saw him again after that day. As for Mr. R, he was arrested on the spot. It was all over the news. Local teacher involved in school shooting incident. The media didn't care that it was an accident. They just ate it up, twisting the story into something far worse than it actually was. I heard later that Mr. R was sentenced to some jail time for negligence, but I don't know what happened to him after that. His career was over, that much was certain. The school, of course, tried to cover it all up as much as they could. They downplayed the incident, called it a tragic accident, and tried to move on. But no one in our town could forget what happened that day. For months, every conversation was about the shooting, the fight, Mr. R. The teachers were different after that, stricter, more nervous, like they were all walking on eggshells, afraid something else might happen. Even years later, when we'd all graduated and moved on, the memory of that day still lingered. It's one of those stories you tell people when they ask about high school. One of those moments where you realize just how quickly everything can change. 1 second, it's just a normal day, and the next, someone's life is hanging in the balance because of one wrong move. I guess that's the thing about high school. You never know what's going to happen, and sometimes, the wildest stories aren't the ones you expect to tell. Story number 4. There are some things from high school you just don't forget. For me, it wasn't a prank or a party. It was a rumor that spiraled so far out of control that it became something straight out of a nightmare. I still don't know how much of it was true, but the way it spread across the school, it felt like one of those urban legends that's too crazy to be made up. It was about a guy named Sam. Now, Sam was this quiet, awkward guy. He wasn't part of any cliques or sports teams, didn't hang out with a big group of friends. Mostly, you'd see him walking the halls with his head down, keeping to himself. He was one of those kids who seemed to fade into the background, the kind of guy you'd forget was there unless someone pointed him out. But that all changed in the spring of our senior year, when the rumors started. At first, it was just whispers in the hallways, nothing out of the ordinary. High school is full of gossip, right? Someone always has a wild story or an exaggerated tale about what someone did at a party or who's secretly dating who. But this rumor, it was different. It wasn't about dating or partying. It was about Sam and, well, something that happened out by the school's ag farm. If you didn't go to a school with an agriculture program, the ag farm was this fenced-off area behind the main building where the FFA, Future Farmers of America, kids took care of animals, cows, pigs, sheep, that kind of thing. It was kind of isolated, tucked away at the far end of the property, and mostly the ag kids were the only ones who ever went there. One day, I was in gym class when I heard someone talking about the incident. A couple of guys were snickering and making these vague, gross jokes about Sam. I didn't think much of it at first. It's high school. People are always making fun of someone for something. But by lunchtime, the whole school was buzzing with the same story, and that's when I heard the full rumor. Apparently, Sam had been caught doing something unspeakable with one of the sheep in the ag farm. The rumor was that he'd been alone out there when it happened, and somehow, the sheep had clamped down so hard that he couldn't. Well, you get the idea. It was sick and bizarre, and honestly, no one really knew if it was true. But the rumor spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, it was all anyone could talk about. It was the kind of story that took on a life of its own. People started adding their own details, making it more outlandish, more graphic. Some said the ag teacher had walked in on him. Others claimed the sheep had to be put down because of what happened. Kids were making crude jokes, drawing disgusting things on the bathroom walls. Sam couldn't walk through the halls without someone pointing and whispering behind his back. I don't think I'd ever seen anyone get isolated so fast. By the end of the week, Sam had stopped coming to school altogether. The rumor got so big that even the teachers caught wind of it, though none of them dared to bring it up directly. You could tell they were aware of what was going on, though. They had this uncomfortable, tight-lipped look every time they saw Sam, like they knew something horrible had happened, but didn't know how to address it. The weirdest part was that no one ever confirmed the story. No one had any real proof. It was just this whisper that had turned into a tidal wave of gossip, and whether or not it was true didn't seem to matter anymore. The damage was done. The weeks went by, and Sam didn't come back to school. Rumor had it that his family had moved out of town, that they couldn't handle the shame of it all. Some said his parents had sent him to a different school far away. Others claimed he'd been homeschooled after that, never to be seen again. The story just ended. No one knew what happened to him, and eventually, the rumor faded as new gossip took its place. But for that brief, intense period, it was all anyone could talk about. The whole thing left a bad taste in my mouth. High school is brutal, but this was something else. It wasn't just bullying. It was like we'd all participated in some collective cruelty, feeding off this ridiculous rumor until it consumed someone's entire life. And the worst part? None of us ever questioned it. No one ever stopped to ask if it was true, if there was any proof, if maybe we'd all just let a stupid joke go too far. We just let it happen. I think about Sam sometimes, wonder where he is now, if he ever managed to move on from what happened. I wonder if he even knows that most of us eventually forgot about it, that we moved on with our lives, while he was left to pick up the pieces of a reputation that might have been destroyed over nothing. High school can be cruel like that. You get caught in the crossfire of one bad rumor, and it can take everything from you, your friends, your confidence, your future. I don't know if Sam's story was true or not, but I do know that we never gave him the benefit of the doubt, and that's something I'll never forget.